and welcome to another edition of Hames Hot Mic, sponsored by Simpson Notaries. I've really been enjoying chatting with our current and would-be politicians, and I hope you are too. Today I'm very excited to check in with one of our newly minted MLAs, Dan Coulter. We'll be back with Dan after this. Welcome back. My guest today is Dan Coulter. Dan, as most will remember, was the chair of the Chilliwack School Board for 2 terms and was active in restorative justice in the community. Now he's the MLA for the Chilliwack riding and acting as the Parliamentary Secretary for Accessibility. Welcome, Mr. Coulter.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Clint.
It's a pleasure for me. I think it's great, and I'm sure your life has changed a lot since the election in October. It feels like that was ages ago, but I'll bet you time is certainly flying for you right now.
Yes, things are going by very, very quickly. I'm doing definitely a lot of learning as I'm going along here, and I'm so busy that the time is really, really flying.
So during the election, folks got a chance to hear you talk about policy and the kinds of things you'd like to see for this community and your vision, but we didn't get a lot of chance to find out a little bit about Dan Coulter and who is this guy that we're electing. We certainly put our faith and trust in you, but maybe you could tell us, what were you doing before you rose to the position of politician in our community? What was your life about before you took the job as school board chair?
I don't know how early you want me to go back, but I...
You're not that old. It won't take that long.
Well, I grew up a little bit everywhere, but I ended up in East Abbotsford. I went to Yale Secondary for my grade 12 year, and then I went to UFE and did welding, and I was a welder for a while, and then from that I got into millwrighting in a sawmill, and I got my red seal as a millwright, and a few years after that, I had a fairly significant accident and now I use a wheelchair. After getting in my accident, it actually really afforded me new opportunities. If anything, I wouldn't be an MLA today if I didn't have that accident, which is kind of odd. But I went back to university and I got a poli-sci degree. And then I started volunteering a lot in my community. I started volunteering on political campaigns, and then I ran in 2011 in my first school board campaign, which I lost, but it was a great learning experience, and I really enjoyed myself. And then I decided to run in 2013 in a by-election and won, and then was a school trustee for 7 years, right up until I was elected as an MLA for Chilliwack.
And I think almost immediately that you got on the board, you became the chair. I guess people saw you at that time as a bit of a moderate. You were chair pretty quickly, as I recall.
Not actually. I was vice chair for a couple of years, yeah. and then Paul McManus was chair, and Walt Cron was vice chair for a couple of years after that, and then I became chair.
That's one of those things. I always remember you as the chair of the board. So,
well, that's very nice.
you were quite remarkable, I guess, in your term there. I'd like to talk about especially your new role, which is not just an MLA, but you've been awarded with the position of Parliamentary Secretary. Before we talk about the work that you're doing there, can you explain what is a parliamentary secretary? I think people understand what a cabinet minister is. What's the role of a parliamentary secretary?
Well, so my role as a parliamentary secretary is you still work in a ministry. You're part of government, but you do more of a consultation piece, or at least that's what I'm doing, more of a consultation piece. I don't actually make the decisions that spend money or anything like that. I consult with the minister and work with the minister under his direction on what his mandate is, as well as my mandate.
And which ministry is it that you're a parliamentary secretary to?
Social development and poverty reduction.
So that's a huge portfolio for the minister, certainly, and fits in well with the notion of accessibility. So tell me a little bit about the projects that you're working on or the advice that you're providing to that ministry. How broad is that advice? I think I'll back up and say I think most folks hear the word accessibility and they think, are you able to get there physically? But accessibility means so much more than that. It can mean accessibility to an education or accessibility to employment or physical accessibility. What's the range of things that you're providing advice on?
So in my mandate letter, the first piece of my mandate letter is that we are going to be introducing accessibility legislation later in the spring session. And so in my mandate letter is to consult with folks around that legislation, make sure it's clearly understood, make sure, it's enabling legislation, so the regulations will come after, and part of that, a lot of the consultation that I will be doing will be focused on these regulations and standards and things. So that's going to be a huge piece of my mandate. And then the second piece of my mandate letter is to work with the Attorney General and Minister responsible for housing on the new building code. So there will be a new building code coming forward, and I'll be consulting with advocacy groups and community groups on accessibility within that building code.
So give me an example of the type of groups that might exist in Chilliwack that you might have the opportunity to consult with.
Any kind of disability advocacy group or disability advocates, folks with lived experience, business people, because we definitely want to make sure that the legislation is well understood among the business community and among other community members, not just folks living with disabilities, and just consulting and with society in general, everyone.
What's the nature of some of the regulations that you're looking at bringing in or improving?
Well, the regulations, we haven't even gotten to that stage where we're even talking about regulations, because the legislation hasn't even been introduced yet. So we're still talking about the legislation a little bit. It's currently being drafted, so we're still talking about those kinds of things, although most of the consultation on the legislation has been done. But, I've been working with a group that was working on the legislation. It became also a COVID working group. So we would be talking about how COVID affected folks with disabilities and stuff like that. But it's mostly now we're waiting for the legislation, and we've been talking about how best do we go out and consult around that legislation. So I'm working with groups on, here's where you should go, this is how you should communicate this piece or that piece, things like that. So I can't tell you exactly what the legislation looks like or what regulations or standards will be in it.
Because it sounds like your role is going to be looking at that legislation and then offering advice from the perspective that you bring to the table to say, yes, I think this is good, or, here's an area we can improve what we're trying to achieve here with the legislation.
There's a little bit of that, but a lot of it is I'm going out and consulting with the community, so I'm more of a conduit, bringing groups together, consulting with them, and then bringing that forth or back to the ministry for consideration.
So you've done some of that consulting work already? Yeah,
so not around specifics around the legislation, but more consulting about how to consult, if you will. Yeah. So, we're laying out a plan of consultation, where we're going to go, when we're going to consult with this, on this piece, and where exactly.
And I'm assuming that a lot of that consultation is going to be with people who live with the challenge of a disability.
Oh yes, absolutely, yes, and advocacy groups, but we're also reaching out to business leaders as well.
I think that's it's exciting because it's a group that can easily be forgotten because many people who, as I say, live with the challenge of a disability also require advocacy to have their issues brought forward because they may not have the skills or ability to, in fact, self-advocate. So that'll be an interesting challenge for you as you move forward. In terms of the MLA's role now, just sort of in general terms with the MLA's role, I spoke with your colleague and passed on your thoughts that you had mentioned to me about it feels at times like you're drinking from a fire hose in terms of how much information is coming at you at once. Are you finding it settling in a little bit now since you've been elected, or is it still a lot of information?
I'm still getting my feet under me, but I think I'm starting to be able to walk a little bit more. I'm starting to understand, more of the systems and the day-to-day and how things are going to be. My parliamentary secretary role too, for a while, I was just kind of going where I was led. Now I'm starting to really start to understand the job and understand where we can go and where we can take it. But the drinking from the fire hose analogy is something that the MLAs say a lot, and it's true. You're first elected, and there's a lot coming at you. There's so many different things you have to do, and getting an office and hiring staff, and then also you have committees going to the legislature. There's just a lot of.
And I suspect it's different if you're in government or in opposition. There may be different learning curves or different aspects about it. You've come into a fairly sizable majority, which means I would suspect the government has a big agenda and they have a lot of things that they want to get done.
Well, I mean, definitely. I think the main task ahead of us, though, is to recover through COVID here, still focusing on keeping people safe, but as well as an inclusive economic recovery. So that's the big task right now. We do have, if you read the ministers and parliamentary secretaries' mandate letters, there are definitely some things that we are doing, but they were all within our platform during the election, so folks won't be surprised.
And I think we're all encouraged to know that the primary role right now of everybody is dealing with COVID and making sure that's in the rearview mirror and then moving on with things. I think everyone's pretty supportive of that agenda. You, as a part of becoming elected an MLA, and I asked MLA Paddon this as well, would have met with the city before too long and talked with them about their priorities. How did you find that meeting? What are some of the things that you foresee being in partnership with the city over in the coming years?
I found that meeting actually really, really great. I've already had some connection with the city. I've been on committees with the city for years now, various committees, transportation, the mayor's task force on diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, as well as I was on the mayor's task force for public safety. But I found the meeting great, but there's lots of areas that where we can work together, whether it's working on the dikes along the Fraser River there. There's a bunch have been heightened, but there's more to go. And, there could be some advocacy there to do there on behalf of the city.
I think one of the issues that is very pressing for me, and I'm sure lots of other folks, and falls a little bit inside your parliamentary secretary role, and that's the issue of housing, especially for housing for folks that currently don't have a place to live. And so many of those folks are also dealing with not only being homeless, but also having a disability related to mental illness. Is that going to be part of the discussion that's going to fall under the parliamentary secretary's consultations?
I'm not exactly sure if that will fall under my consultations. However, that work is being done. Before the election, in the last 3.5 years, we did have 2 modular supportive housing units built here in Chilliwack, and the province, the provincial government is going to continue that work throughout the province, making sure that, getting affordable housing for people.
Yeah, it's an important role that provincial government has, and I know there was a period of time where local governments were simply pointing at the provincial government and saying, this is your responsibility, you do it. Much more has been accomplished through partnerships now with local governments, and that's encouraging, especially if you're somebody who needs that kind of housing. I want to talk a little bit about how people contact you, because I think it's extremely important that people see the MLA's office up and running, whatever that looks like in this day and age. Have you got an office ready to go, and are you taking visitors? Are you able to have constituents come and have you help them with their problems?
We took over John Martin's office location, which is on Airport Road, kind of across from the police station there. But at this time, we're not taking folks into the office, but we are available by phone and through email. We are helping folks with casework. One of the biggest pieces is making sure that folks are applying for the recovery benefit. Yes. And so we're doing that, as well as I am doing phone meetings with constituents and Zoom meetings as well.
That's great. We'll flash up on the screen how folks can get in touch with you. That's really important. I think that people know how to get in touch or connected with their MLAs in a time when it's not possible to do so in person. So we're going to take just a quick couple of minute break here, and we'll be back very shortly with our MLA, Dan Coulter. Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with MLA Dan Coulter, and we're talking about his new role as an MLA for our community, and also his role as the Parliamentary Secretary for Accessibility. Thanks again, Dan, for joining us. On a personal level, what have you found to be the biggest adjustment to going from, Dan Coulter, Citizen School Board Chair, and now Dan Coulter with the weight of the world on your shoulders in expectation as an MLA?
I guess it's just really the busyness of it all, and the meetings. A lot of meetings that I'm not used to that many meetings necessarily. I'm used to in my other job. I'm just used to doing work and stuff. So I guess that's the biggest adjustment. I don't really feel a heck of a lot of pressure yet, because I really enjoy the work, and I enjoy all of the work, from helping folks at our constituency office all the way to being in the legislature. What's the
most common thing you're dealing with as an MLA right now?
Yeah, mostly the recovery benefit. So I have, folks who are maybe seniors having quite a bit of difficulty applying for the benefit, or folks on lower incomes that don't necessarily have access to computers. There are folks who have difficulty reading, but we're helping them all get the benefit. That's been the main work so far, like in far as helping folks, and then we help with all sorts of other things too.
What's the biggest surprise you found in this new job?
The biggest surprise?
Something you weren't expecting. You talked about being very busy. Is there an aspect to the work that you went, wow, I had no idea, or...
The reality sort of hits you just after the election, and it isn't a surprise because MLAs have to do this, but it's a surprise when you have to do it. You're like, oh, wait, I have to hire staff. I have to set up an office. I have to do this. I have to do that. You don't really think about that during the election necessarily, and then it all kind of hits you after you're elected. Oh, geez, I have to do all these other things, and it is very overwhelming at first, especially because you don't necessarily know how to do any of these things. And so at the same time, you're getting a bunch of information thrown at you from the legislature itself, and all the different protocols and different things that you have to do.
And throw in an international worldwide pandemic, and that changes the perspective on everything you're doing at the same time. So it's got to be quite difficult. Do you get to go and meet in person at all with any of the other MLAs at this point in time, or your minister, or those sorts of things?
No, I actually haven't left Chilliwack.
So
It's all been virtual and over the web. So that is another challenge you feel. You don't get quite the connection with your caucus colleagues as you would if you were in Victoria and in face-to-face meetings with them and being able to see them in the halls and stuff. So yeah, right now everything's over a computer screen.
And excuse my ignorance, has there been a parliamentary session yet scheduled? Has the legislature sat through this last period of time?
So we sat for 2 weeks in December, and that was to pass the recovery benefit so that we could get that out to British Columbians. And we will sit again the first week of March. And then I'm not sure how long we sit for, but it's a few months, and then a summer break, and then we go back in the fall again.
And you've got a budget to pass, I'm assuming. Is that work starting already?
Yeah, I'm not on the finance committee, but I believe it is, and yeah, we will be passing a budget in the spring session.
And I think British Columbians are happy with generally the way the pandemic response has gone. Can you provide any input into how it's going, how you feel it's going, how you're being told it's going in our particular community in the Chilliwack riding? Are we doing things right? Are you hearing good things about our response here?
Absolutely. There's a real balance to be here between keeping people safe and allowing them to work in the community and for or kids to go to school. So there's really real balance to be held. But I think we're doing a really, really good job of it. Some people think there should be a full lockdown. Others think that restrictions should be lifted. But I think we're striking the right balance.
It seems so. I think, like most people, I sit at 3 o'clock every day waiting for the numbers to come out, and my mood changes depending on what that number looks like. And we seem to have been flat for quite a while, and the numbers stayed relatively high, not necessarily in our own community, but throughout British Columbia. Is there anything else coming down the pipeline with respect to COVID? Vaccinations are, right now it feels like we're kind of slow on vaccinations. Are you aware, is that going to pick up? Are we working towards that, do you think?
Yeah, so the province's current vaccination strategy is in 4 phases. And so phase 4, which is the last phase, will be completed September. So that will be for 24 to 18-year-olds will get their first dose in August and their second dose in September. And then the population will be vaccinated. So, halfway through September or by the end of September, everyone should be vaccinated. It's mostly by age. There are some other conditions that can get you moved up on the list, but it's mostly by age. Age seems to be the main determining factor of both whether you're susceptible to catching the virus, but also how dangerous it is and for your life.
And we're still on track. That plan that was laid out is still, despite hearing that we're behind on getting our supply of vaccine, that's still on track, and that's the schedule.
Yeah, that plan was actually just introduced last week, I believe, and it came after we realized that we weren't going to get all the vaccine that we had ordered
in the initial stages.
Yeah.
So, as I say and have said to any of the other political guests I've had on here, I really appreciate the work that you're doing on behalf of our community, and I know it's not easy work. You exist in a world where people have very high expectations, and you've put yourself out there to say, I'm ready to help, and I appreciate that very much. I've lived in that world for many years, and I know the kind of toll it can take on you as an individual, and I know what it can do to your family. Good news right now is that you get to be with your family every day instead of being away, and I think that's a blessing. You should be very thankful for at this point. Yeah. That as we get through COVID is going to change, I suspect. Families holding up well through all of this?
Yes, yeah, so far pretty well. I mean, I think myself being elected as an MLA is less stressful than COVID. So, yeah, and I'm actually home more because now I'm working within town here. Before I had a job and I was a school trustee, so I'm not working into the evenings as a school trustee right now. So.
And I might offer, having recently our community's gone through an election for school trustee, I might offer that maybe your job as an MLA is less stressful than it was as the chair of a rather interesting, shall we say, school board. So we won't go into that, but I will say I want to thank you so much for being on the show. And if there's ever a time you need to come and talk to the community about an issue, or whether I think there's a time you should come and talk to the community about an issue, I hope you'll come back and join us again on my little adventure called Hames Hot Mic.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me, Clint.
Thanks so much, Dan. I wanted to thank MLA Coulter for his time today. I know how hard his job and the job of other elected officials is, and I really appreciate them taking time to spend with us. Hope you enjoyed the show today, and we'll see you next time on Hames Hot Mic.